I I might say on the face of it, this is a very, very tenuous legal argument which cannot be at all accepted by any reasonable and serious international lawyer. Why? Because the concept of self-defense actually is a justification for the use of force on the part of the state when the state itself is being attacked, or at least when it expects the attack to be perpetrated against it imminently, so in the near future on its territory. For example, when Israel in the 6 Days War attacked its neighboring Arab countries preemptively, it also acted in self-defense. Of course, its territory wasn't already attacked, but all the military preparations were over, and if Israel didn't react, probably it would be wiped out from the face of earth because of the impending attack by the Arab countries. But in this particular case, was Russia really expecting an imminent attack from Ukraine or from any allies of Ukraine, NATO countries maybe, who were trying to use the Ukrainian territory to attack Russia? Well, we don't have any proof of this. I mean, there is only some allegations on the part of Russian authorities that in the future they could expect that on the territory of Ukraine some military installations would be put, which could in some possible scenario target Russian cities and cause, of course, armed aggression against Russia. But this was a future, how to say, speculative scenario. None of the preparations for this scenario were actually being realized. So again, as I say, on the face of it, this justification is invalid under international law. You cannot use preemptive self-defense in against a state which is only under a hypothetical scenario gonna attack you. But do we have some precedents in state practice for this legal justification? Unfortunately, yes, we do. When the United States attacked Iraq in 2003, it claimed that it was acting in preemptive self-defense because it said Iraq is developing weapons of mass destruction. So if we wait for the moment when they acquire them and they would be capable of attacking the territory of the United States or its allies, then it will be too late. We must act now preemptively in self-defense to protect our sovereignty and right of existence of us and our allies. So what I'm trying to say is, unfortunately, this, how to say, fraying of international rules, this wide interpretations of existing concepts, which are stripping them of their logic and of their original purpose, has not begun with this Russian special military operation. It has begun much earlier, unfortunately, in the activities of great powers and in their usage of force against perceived enemies. So this is something which is an unfortunate development going on for several decades in the past. And finally, the third justification for the use of force, which was used by Russia, was the right of self-determination by Russian ethnic speakers, right, in Ukraine, who, in their opinion, had the right to succeed from Ukraine and therefore then to become part of Russian territory and or to call Russia as an independent state to assist them. So this is kind of indirect justification for the use of force. If you remember, at the beginning of special military operations, some legal steps were taken before the start of activities. Firstly, these two republics, so-called republics in Luhansk and Donetsk, proclaimed their independence. So Russia then recognized them as independent states, and then they called Russian intervention. So in a way, is this legal under international law? Yes. I mean, independent states can call the help of other independent states to help them in their self-defense against. But this is now the point of view, whether they were independent states. So from the point of view of Russia, they were, but from the point of Ukraine, they weren't. And from the point of view of the rest of the international community, they certainly weren't. And so this justification on the use of force, this third and last justification, actually revolves around the concept of self-determination and succession, and whether it is possible for the part of state to become independent unilaterally, to succeed, right? Under Ukrainian constitution, under Ukrainian internal law, it was definitely not possible. So this succession is invalid. And what does international law have to say about it? Whether these Donbass so-called republics, Donetsk and Lugansk, and we see now some other parts of Ukraine had the right to succeed. Well, in international practice, we have certain criteria for so-called remedial succession. This is a concept in which certain parts of the territory of a sovereign state can claim independence if the people from this territory, but if they can be firstly identified as a separate people, have for a long time been stripped of any right to participate in the power, in the sharing of power in the political system of the state. So this is what was also used as, I'm coming back to the issue of Kosovo, this was what was also used as a justification for the use of force in Kosovo, that actually the self-determination process of Albanians had to be helped because they had the right to succeed, because they were for a decade or so, or even more, being totally excluded from the political system of Serbia. Their human rights were not respected, and they simply didn't have any other avenue, any other recourse to fulfill their right as a people than to succeed. But this concept is somehow a gray zone in international law. So we don't have clear rules on self-determination or succession. Remedial succession is more a concept in theory. We have some certain, how to say, judicial pronouncements on this topic by domestic courts, by international courts. We have, for example, the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice concerning the independence of Kosovo, but in which it actually evaded the issue of the independence. It just stated that the declarations of independence per se are not legal, but it didn't say, in my opinion, what was the crucial aspect of the issue. Is it legal for other states to recognize the unilaterally proclaimed independent parts of a previously sovereign state? This is what is, so was Russia breaching international law when recognizing Donetsk and Lugansk? And of course, anybody can adopt a declaration of independence. This is not something which is international law should be concerned with. I agree on this point with court. We have, for example, the Constitutional Court of Quebec, a Constitutional Court of Canada deciding on the issue of Quebec succession, in which it gave some criteria in which remedial succession would be possible, but this is, the decision of the internal court, municipal court, which is not really applicable to other situations in other states. So this rests as a gray zone international law, as I say, and simply, but what is for sure prohibited by international law, and this is something which actually flows from the prohibition on the use of force. It is prohibited for third states to use force to help the secessionist movements to in their fight for independence against the state. So this is prohibited. This was well established, for example, in the case of Bangladesh seceding from Pakistan, or in the cases of certain states in Africa, when South Africa was intervening to help them in their fight for independence, or for example in the case of Cyprus, when Turkish government intervened by force to help the succession of Northern Cyprus. So this is something which is prohibited, and definitely because I think it is obvious not only in the special military operation, but even since the Crimean independence, that Russia used force to help this independence movement, that this is actually what is prohibited by international law. And again, I think Russia is in breach of international law. So I think I used the time allocated and in a way gave you food for thought, these three justifications so we have offered. I would also like to talk, maybe if we have time in the discussion, about this denazification concept and why is it also from the legal point of view interesting for the Russian use of force. But let's for now leave it at this and give the floor to the other speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mihajlo. Well, as I said, this is the second event of our internship. Sorry for again saying this, because I didn't record it first 10 minutes, so I will just in short repeat this, that we chose this day because of this Armistice Day moment, and because we will wish to see peace on the European continent as soon as possible. We will do as much as we can in Serbia to reflect and to see what are the positions of the sides. So we have two speakers, Dr. Mihajlo Vučić from Institute of International Politics and Economics, who was speaking about Russian justifications, as he said, and not excuses for the war in Ukraine, and Mr. Jan Cingel from strategic analysis think tank in Slovakia, who will now tell us more about the NATO position, which is maybe the position that we cannot hear that much in Serbian media. Dr. Vučić was speaking about 3 or 4 justifications for this war. So the first was about the prevention of a genocide and the crimes against humanity, where we have a legal precedence in the form of military intervention against Yugoslavia in 1999, but not the acceptance of all the other states. Also, in this case, we didn't have a Security Council resolution, only after the intervention. And the third one was the preemptive self-defense. You could hear about that, and the right of self-determination. In the other segment of this event, we will hear about the NATO concept and actually not the concept, but the NATO perspective of this intervention and the war in Ukraine. So Jan, please, the microphone is yours.
Thank you very much, Marina. Thank you very much to you and to PAS for inviting me for this really interesting discussion. Thank you also to your interns for joining us this Friday afternoon for this discussion. I had the honor to have a kind of a lecture for your last year's graduates of the internship. That time it was about a different topic, of course. So I'm really thankful that you invited me for this discussion as well. I must make a couple of footnotes. First of all, I represent the strategic analysis think tank that is a Slovakia-based think tank. So we are dealing with international relations, especially we focus on the Balkans and the countries of the Eastern Partnership, where also the Ukraine belongs. I'm not academic, so pardon me if I will be talking more from based on what is going on and how the situation has been developing before the start of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. I will use this word because I will explain why it is the aggression, and then I will be analyzing also the next steps, and based on that I will make some presumptions, and then if I will touch upon also some of the arguments that Mihajlo was mentioning. I took some notes, so if Mihajlo, if you will agree, I will comment on those a little bit as well, and then maybe we can go to the second round, because I'm really curious about the denazification concept. That's really what's very interesting for me. Okay, second footnote, which is very important to note, especially taking into consideration that the public, the listeners or participants to these events are from Serbia, is to note that NATO is not a warring party in this conflict. It is a conflict between Russia and Ukraine. I know it has been many times protracted, and it's a Russia's narrative that this is a war of Russia against NATO. That is actually not the case. Russia invaded Ukraine on the 24th of February after a couple of months of preparations. We have seen the preparations since at least November 2021. Western intelligence services were warning about the imminence of the attack, and they issued warning. Even a couple of months, they issued a warning also to Moscow: do not do it. They nevertheless decided to do it. Why Russia is using this term war against NATO? Well, first of all, Russia is doing really poorly in Ukraine, and if you can see, yesterday they had to abandon Kherson, which is the biggest city which they managed to conquer in Ukraine. So their military is performing really badly. So they cannot say that they are performing so badly against so weak enemy as is Ukraine. So they are using this narrative: we are fighting, of course, a stronger enemy, which is the whole NATO, because otherwise Russia's army cannot be defeated by some kind of a peasants from Ukrainian steppes. That is first. Second, this narrative is very strong, especially in Serbia, and it's used in Serbia because NATO is very unpopular in Serbia. It's for obvious reasons, because of the 99 and the NATO intervention, and of course the war in Kosovo, and is using this narrative to swing the mood in Serbia in a way in order it is sympathetic to what Russia is doing in Ukraine. But I will explain what the the real state of the conflict is on the ground. So NATO is not a warring party. NATO has a certain position on this conflict, and that is following. Actually, it's very simple. It is based on the international law and not on Russia's mythos. First of all, Russia violated all possible international laws, even those which Mihajlo was quoting, by violently attacking, unprovokedly attacking territory of its neighbor and violating its internationally recognized territory. But actually, this did not happen now in February. This happened in the year 2014. So what we see is not the 8 months of the war in Ukraine. This is already 8th year of the war in Ukraine. So that is very important to bear in mind. Second, Russia not only attacked the territory of Ukraine, which was internationally recognized, but it also officially in their perception, annexed some parts of this Ukrainian territory. First, they started with Crimea in 2014. Now they created this so-called People's Republic of Donetsk and Luhansk. They recognized their independence, and now after this sham referenda, they even annexed them as a part of the Russia, including with some parts of Kherson region and some parts of Zaporozhye region, and basically most of the Luhansk and the Donetsk. So that's a direct violation of the international law. So basically, Russia has conducted military aggression that is forbidden by the UN Charter and a number of international agreements. First of all, also it's important to highlight that it was unprovoked aggression, because Ukraine has as an independent and sovereign country has a right to conduct its foreign policy the way they want. If they decided that they want to be a member of the European Union, and here I stressed very strongly, Ukraine was trying to become a member of the European Union or to be associated member of the European Union back in 2014, and that was basically the launcher of all those events that take place in 2013 and 2014. There was no discussion about NATO back in that time. Even so, Ukraine was military neutral before the year 2014. So it was like Serbia, actually. It changed only its position after this attack, which took place in 2014 and then developed in 2022. So, in my opinion, this is the reason why it was unprovoked, because Ukraine has the right to conduct its foreign policy and foreign relations as an independent state, sovereign state, and in accordance with its interests. And for Ukraine, interests were that they want to close a cooperation with the European Union, with the EU, and they were trying to reach the membership of the European Union. Now they actually got to the candidate status. I will get to that a little bit later. Also, Russia violated its own commitment towards Ukraine from the year 1994, so-called Budapest Memorandum, in which US, Great Britain, and Russia agreed with Ukraine and also Belarus and Kazakhstan that these three countries, Kazakhstan, Belarus, and Ukraine, will give up nuclear weapons that were on their territory because of the Soviet Union. So after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, these three former republics of the Soviet Union, they decided that they will give up voluntarily of their nuclear weapons. In return for that, these major powers, Russia, US, and Great Britain, agreed that they will be kind of observing this status, that these countries will not be violated. I will quote from the Budapest Memorandum now, a couple of points in order we know what we are talking about. So the point number one was that all signatories parties respect independence and sovereignty in the existing borders. Second, that the signatory parties refrain from the threat of use of force against the signatory. Third, that they refrain from economic coercion designed to subordinate to their own interests the exercise by the signatory of the rights inherent in the sovereignty and thus to secure advantages of any kind. Fourth, they will seek immediate Security Council action to provide assistance to a signatory if they should become a victim of an act of aggression or an object of a threat of aggression in which nuclear weapons are used. Fifth, refrain from the use of nuclear arms against the signatory. And sixth, consult with one another if questions arise regarding these commitments. So basically, Russia broke every single of these promises that they promised to Ukraine in 1994, when Ukraine gave up voluntarily of the nuclear weapons. Had the Ukraine had nuclear weapons now, believe me, we would be living in a different world, or there would be no world at all. So that's another point. Russia started this aggression already in the year 2014 and violated each of these points. And based on this memorandum, Budapest memorandum, actually US and Great Britain as a parties to this memorandum, they had obligation to assist Ukraine. So if now somebody is blaming West that they are supporting Ukraine with the weapons, well, both US and the Great Britain are signatory parties to this memorandum. So basically they are legally obliged to assist. Okay, the EU is also assisting because of the bilateral ties with the Ukraine, but legally taken, both the US and Great Britain, they were legally obliged to assist in order that is those 5-6 points that I mentioned are not violated. As a precondition, if we are thinking about the reasons why Russia used force and why it attacked Ukraine, we should not slide down to whataboutism, which Russia likes to use, and the Russian propaganda, which is trying to kind of whitewash why they did it. Yes, the mistakes and the crimes of other countries in the past should not be kind of a justification of the mistakes that are taking place now. Mistakes are for that in order they are not repeating again. And it's not about using them as a precedence for using the force again, because this is a recipe for disaster. If any other country is using, oh, okay, US did it, so we can do it. Russia did it, so we can do it as well. What if China will decide to attack Taiwan? What if China will decide to attack India? India and Pakistan, you know, these are all very sensitive topics. So we should stick to the international law and not to use this kind of a precedences they did, so we can do as well. And this actually relates to Kosovo, which I would like to discuss a little bit as well, because making comparison to Kosovo case, I think it's very wrong from the Russia side. I mean, the Russia was kind of a pointing to a Kosovo case that the West did it, what they did. So basically, we can do the same in Ukraine. I think it's a really full argument first, and second, it is a very bad argument for Serbia. I would say Russia basically stepped Serbia to the back when they recognized the independence of Donetsk and Luhansk Republic, because with that they basically recognized Kosovo. So this is really dangerous and very thin ice to walk on. But I can discuss it little bit deeper. Yes, there was no decision by the UN Security Council that would allow the allies strikes or allies intervention in Serbia. But why was that? Because Russia would veto it or threatened to veto such action. And why Russia was doing it? Because Russia wanted to keep influence in Western Balkans through Serbia, or that time Yugoslavia, of course. So they gave a kind of a false hope to Milosevic that they will veto UN resolution about Kosovo, but then allies decided that they will intervene nonetheless, and it was even more tragic. So maybe if there would be a decision, a resolution by the UN backed by Russia, threatening with the intervention, maybe Milosevic would withdraw his forces, and maybe the parties would sit down at the table earlier, and there would be no those civilian victims that were there afterwards, after the strikes. So we need to take a look also from this perspective. So now that was kind of a lead up to the aggression, and now what Russia is doing. Yes, they are justifying their approach, as Mihajlo pointed out, those different points, but they are changing this narrative over the time, and that is actually making it less trustworthy or less plausible, and it is reflecting how they are performing on the ground. The facts are that the Russian army is performing poorly, that it is the operation was poorly planned. Basically, Russia already lost because their main goal was a regime change in Ukraine. They didn't manage that within those first 3 days. They were defeated near Kiev. They had to withdraw, so they redesigned their strategy. They redesigned their goal, military goal, and said, okay, we are here protecting Donbass. But their initial goal was to change the regime in Ukraine in order there is some kind of a puppet regime that would be willing to support Russia's. They failed in that. Now they are withdrawing from even parts that they declared a Russian territory. Kherson was declared as a Russian territory. So basically Russia is now, if we are taking it from their point of view, is retreating from its own territory. Their army is demotivated because they know they shouldn't be there on the territory of Ukraine. Marina mentioned that shall this be a day of armistice in order this conflict is over and we are finished with it? Well, it can be over within 1 day, as long as Russia leaves Ukraine and takes all its troops from the territory of Ukraine. This war is over. If Ukraine gives up, then there is no Ukraine anymore. So that's the difference. If Russia decides to stop this war, they can stop it today. If Ukraine stops this war, they are finished. And with that, also some other. So that's first. Second, Russia gravely miscalculated resilience of Ukraine. They didn't expect that they will put up this kind of a fight. Even West was not aware of this kind of resilience of Ukraine. It was a surprise even for West. You know, the famous quote when Americans were suggesting Zelensky that he should leave Kiev, and he wrote them back, "I don't need a ride, I need ammunition." Yes, well, it's that's kind of captures it. So even West was caught by surprise by the Ukrainians' resilience, and now the West is united. That's also another surprise which Russia was not counting on, that the West will be so united in sanctions, and those sanctions are biting, believe me. And the second, that there will be such a strong support for Ukraine, military support. So countries like Germany, which nobody would ever dream about, that Germany will be sending a military assistance to a warring party somewhere in the Eastern Europe against Russia, that they will cancel the South Stream. So these were huge miscalculations by the Russia. The West is united in the sanctions. All countries of Europe, except for Belarus and unfortunately Serbia, are parties to the sanctions mechanism against Russia. Most of the countries of the West, yes. If you take a look at the globe, yes, mathematically the global South, Asia, Africa, South America, they are either neutral or some of them are supporting Russia. But basically the whole West is united in sanctions against Russia. West is delivering weapons. First, carefully and hesitantly, let's send them only weapons which look like Soviet-made, that maybe Ukrainians found them out somewhere in the grandmama's house. But now they are sending the top-grade Western equipment. They are training soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers on their territory. Ukrainian soldiers are being trained also in Slovakia, Poland, Romania, UK, Netherlands, Denmark. And in order they can, in peace, they can train them, and then they are sent back to Ukraine to protect their land. We are delivering also Western grade military equipment. Slovakia is one of the biggest donors. per capita. If you compare it with the number of people, Slovakia donated really a lot to Ukraine, and others are of course Baltic states, Poland, Czechia, and then goes the others, of course. What else changed from the Russia's strategic calculus? Well, Ukraine is now a candidate country to the EU. It was granted a candidate status, so basically it's at the par with Serbia, Montenegro, Albania, North Macedonia. Okay, it's a different stage because they haven't started the negotiation processes yet, but they are the candidates already. Before they were not, and frankly, there was a very long way ahead, first. And second, in terms of NATO, there were lots of very hesitant NATO member countries which would never grant Ukraine a membership as long as there was a conflict with Russia. Okay, now NATO membership of Ukraine is still not in the play. It's still very sensitive, but what is in the play is a membership of Finland and Sweden, which were long-term neutral countries, and they are now joining NATO. Before the end of this year, they will join NATO. And the border of Russia and NATO, which they are quoting that, NATO is encircling us. Before it was 1,207 kilometers along that border. After 1st of January or first months of the next year, it will be 2,549 kilometers. So twice as long, because there will be added a new member of the NATO, Finland. And actually, Finnish Prime Minister very nicely put it how the war in Ukraine should end. And she said it that similarly as what I said a couple minutes ago, if Russia leaves, then there is no war in Ukraine. And plus, if there is an argument that Russia is fighting with NATO, and this whole conflict is about Russia versus NATO, even basic military logic is going against this, because Russia is withdrawing its forces from borders with NATO and moving them to Ukraine in order they are fighting there because they need that fighting force in Ukraine instead of protecting their border from NATO, because they know that nobody from NATO will attack them. They know it very well, and they know that they need those troops in Ukraine. So that's kind of my intro. And if I may react to Mihajlo, what Mihajlo was mentioning, well, genocide prevention in Donbass, that's also Mihajlo mentioned that it's a very weak argument, and I totally agree. It's even illogical because Ukraine was weaker country from the very beginning. Russia had troops on its border since at least November last year, prepared for fight. So Ukraine wouldn't be so stupid and conduct genocide if they know that there is 200,000 Russian soldiers just waiting for opportunity to cross those borders. So this is totally illogical argument. On contrary, Russia is conducting genocide at the moment. They are performing ethnic cleansing. They are forcibly resettling citizens from Ukraine to Russia. They are torturing. They are forcefully evacuating civilians and shifting them to Russia, even though they wanted to go to Ukraine. That was the case of Mariupol, when people wanted to run to Ukraine's controlled territories, but they were prevented to do so. They had to go to Russia. Forced separations of children for parents, etc., etc. That also covers the second justification, crimes against humanity. Yes, Russia is at the moment conducting crimes against humanity in Ukraine. Precedences about humanitarian intervention. As I mentioned, precedences, let's be very careful about historical precedences, because that will lead us to really even a deeper abyss. Preemptive self-defense. Yes, in the international law there is the self-defense, but that's what actually Ukraine is doing right now. Ukraine is conducting its right to self-defend against aggression. I don't see in the international law some preemptive self-defense, and as I mentioned, Ukraine was neutral up until the year 2000, military neutral up until the year 2014. There were no NATO military installations, and there was no plan for establishing NATO bases there. So there was really no point in doing some preemptive strikes. Rights of self-determination. Well, this is extremely dangerous argument for Serbia, because yes, then there is a Kosovo and Kosovo's case. So if Russia is using this argument, basically is recognizing Kosovo, as I mentioned already, if there is a right for remedial secession, there will be dozens of other entities popping up around the world, which would refer to this right of self-determination and secession based on a remedial secession. So I would stop here and give the floor to questions or further discussion. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jan. Well, you could see in this, let's say, almost an hour, how different views are here, and I think that for any sentence and for every justification, we would have something more to add or to discuss or to debate or to call into question. So I believe that all of you have questions for both of us, both of our speakers. I will use this opportunity just to tell and to mark some maybe different points that Jan mentioned, for example, about the about the reasons why Russia actually wanted to intervene are not that much maybe in 2014 and the integration in the EU, but the Bucharest summit of NATO in 2008 and the call for Ukraine and Georgia to join NATO. I think that is the key moment when which Russia considers that crossed its red lines and started to think about the military, the use of military and military means. Also, the other thing, the color revolutions is something that Russia would say that the West invented. So the West invented color revolution. So is something wrong in that Russia wants to change regime in Kiev? You know, like they will say, okay, you did it you are doing that all the time, so you're now telling to us that we cannot do that. So also, if you're speaking about mistakes, if that were mistakes and that Russia should not copy the West in that mistakes, so we are speaking about the military interventions, we are speaking about the color revolutions, if that are mistakes and we are going to see them as mistakes, then somebody should recognize it as a mistake and maybe apologize for that, you know, just to note that it is a mistake. But here we have all the time justification that, for example, the intervention on Yugoslavia was right thing to do and not the mistake, or that the color revolution in some of countries were the right thing to do and not mistakes. So that is one, also the second note. I think it's very dangerous that you said, Jan, about the nuclear weapons, that if Ukraine had nuclear weapons, that it would deter a Russian attack. You know, I'm dealing with these issues, and it is a very dangerous statement because the United States was the first one to insist on the denuclearization of these three countries, so the Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Ukraine, because the non-proliferation norm is one of the most important norms, and the norm that all nuclear power states are, accepting it. So nobody would accept Ukraine with nuclear weapons. Nobody, not the US. So it is a very dangerous statement. And of course, I support denuclearization of all these countries and the Budapest Memorandum. I know that you said that in the context of Budapest Memorandum, but it was something not only that Russia wanted. Actually, the United States was the one that mostly wanted, let's say, this scenario. And Russia is also calling in question all documents. For example, the founding act of NATO Russia, they said that NATO breached the agreement by installing military equipment in the Eastern Europe when they became NATO members. But as you can see, we could speak about this, like in several sessions the next, like year. But of course, we have only this, let's say, hour and a half, let's say, like this today. So I will not speak more, but just to reflect some of the points, how big this discussion is. And I will now like to give a floor to Mihajlo to answer to all of this first, and then in short to tell us something about the notification, and then all of you can also have a time for a question. So we should do this in the next half an hour. Please, Mihajlo.
Thank you. It was really a pleasure listening to Jan and to Marina's comments. So, I mean, there are too many points raised that you can actually comment on all of them, but I will try to pick some of them at least. First is something which might be interesting for students here, and Jan partially mentioned it, that it is very dangerous for Serbia, this Russian usage of the self-determination concept. But if we look at the Russian approach to self-determination and right to succession, actually Russia has followed the argument of remedial succession for a very long time. Since the Georgian War and the succession of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, Russia has established in its international statements that remedial succession is an existing right in international relations. It was actually one of the rare countries that participated in the proceedings in front of the International Court of Justice when it was deciding on the advisory opinion for Kosovo, which also provided the argument that remedial succession exists as a right. But just the criteria in the case of Kosovo are not fulfilled for triggering of this right. And it says that, on the other hand, the situation for Donbass, for the republics of Donetsk and Lugansk were fulfilled, that they had the right to remedial succession. Why? Well, the crucial distinction they make is that actually Kosovo Albanians had the constitutionally guaranteed autonomy, while the people in Donbass didn't. So this is something which, it's not a matter of principle, it's a matter of facts. So Russia is not stabbing Serbia in the back when it is claiming the right to remedial succession. It is actually, how to say, much more honest in this approach than some Western partners of Serbia who are actually exposing in their policies double standards. They say sometimes that this right exists, sometimes it doesn't. It depends really on their foreign policy approach. Russia is at least on paper claiming that this right exists always, but just this distinguishes the cases based on the facts. Because if you look at the Kosovo issue, the only explanation, I was recently talking at the conference organized by the Institute in which Marina and I are working with the Swedish ambassador in Belgrade, and he was speaking about the Ukraine war, and I asked him if he can make a distinction. He is also a lawyer, I believe, a legal distinction between Russia's intervention in Ukraine and between NATO's intervention in Yugoslavia. From the point of view of international law, is it any different? And he said, no, but this was a mistake. Yugoslavia was a mistake, and we shouldn't make another mistake. I think Jan actually made essentially the same point. So, but then it turns around this issue of who can make the mistake and get away with it. So the United States can, right? And their allies. They made a mistake in Yugoslavia. No international lawyer, even from the US, who is serious, can claim that this was legal, except maybe a legal advisor for the US foreign ministry. But what about it? I mean, was there any kind to at least give excuse for this illegality? Not to say about some reparations or any kind of, damages to Serbia because of this breach of law. And now, if Russia gets away with this again, then what happens? I mean, in a certain point of view, it already has got away, because if we look at the situation before 24th February and now, well, now we have Donetsk and Lugansk as the newly proclaimed independent republics incorporated into Russia. We have some other parts of Ukrainian territory occupied and incorporated into Russia, and we have some, feelers on the part of some Western countries which say that maybe some diplomatic compromise can be reached to freeze the conflict at this part, because nobody is realistically expecting Ukraine to reconquer Melitopol or Mariupol or the Donetsk and Lugansk in their complete, territory. So Russia has illegally used force and has got away with it. So it the issue revolves around the great powers and their interpretation of rules, and who is the great power and who can interpret the rules. The US can, obviously they can get away with it. Whether Russia can, I think this war will show for sure. It did in the past, but maybe in some instances which didn't attract the attention of the international community, for example, in Georgia, but now the international community has reacted much more negatively, but again, not the whole of it, right? Russia still has at least tacit support by some important countries, even by one permanent member of the Security Council. If you remember, for example, the Suez crisis, in this instance, Great Britain and France, as permanent members of the Security Council, they tried to unilaterally intervene on the territory of a sovereign state, Egypt, by force to prevent the nationalization of Suez Canal because it wasn't in their interest. And then, well, what they got in response by other great powers, by the US primarily, was no, you cannot do that. And from then on, they didn't try to do it. They didn't unilaterally try without the US permission to attack other sovereign countries. Russia did exactly this now, and probably it will get away with it at least in partially. So maybe it will not fulfill all its objectives from the beginning of the military operation, but definitely Ukraine sovereignty had been breached, and it's breached permanently. And probably Russia wouldn't, be called to answer for it in front of any, international avenue for establishing of state responsibilities. So this is, I think this is what is very important for the future of international relations and international law in general, for the great powers to decide on the new rules, or at least a new interpretation of the existing rules on the use of force. All these justifications that I talked about, we cannot just dismiss them as precedents which are not important, but they are important because precedents in a way create law, or at least creatively interpret the existing legal rules. So someone is behaving and he thinks he can get away with it differently from the letter of law. And if nothing is being done about it, so the law changes. And if we reach some kind of agreement in future, I believe it will be about who can do what with the use of force in international relations. And this will bring the new stability to the international system. So maybe some zones of influence and the possibility to use force in the near abroad, at least by the great powers, would be a much more better solution for international law, international relations in general, than this, strict rules on the use of force from the UN Charter, which are obviously not passing the test of time as the time goes by. And the denazification concept, it is maybe more of a side topic, not so important as these others that we raised, but it is very interesting because what I want to prove with it again, as with these other justifications, Russia is all the time speaking the language of law in its, narrative about this conflict, while many of the Western media and even law specialists from the West try to say that Russia is disregarding international law or just speaking the pure language of force. Denazification concept was, in my opinion, at least, this is really my opinion, I didn't find any proof of it in Russian official statements, but it's very interesting that it was used as a concept by the Allied powers at the end of the Second World War to justify the changing on the institutions of the political system of Nazi Germany, because under the law of occupation then and under the law of occupation now, in international law, you cannot change the laws and political institutions of occupied countries. But the denazification concept was used actually to justify this, because the Nazi ideology as such was against the principles of international law and principles of friendly relations between countries, and thus it had to be, wiped out from the political system of Germany. And therefore, this proved as a justification for the Allies during their occupation to completely change the German political system and the look of German state. Russia is, I think, using the denazification concept to give more legitimacy to what is now doing to Ukraine political system in the occupied territories, completely changing it, disregarding Ukrainian authorities and Ukrainian institutions of power, and in its own view, giving itself a legitimate right to do so. But as I said, this is only my thinking. I will be interested to know what do you think about that, Jan, and maybe some students, but I will, for the time being, I will stop.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
I will just to complete the whole story, just mark one more thing for Jan, and would like to ask Mihajlo maybe in few short sentences to say who is party of the war. So if NATO is training Ukrainian soldiers on its soil and in its member countries, and is also giving weapons, does it make NATO a part of or one of the parties in this war? This is just to complete the picture that Jan and Mihajlo presented, and one more point for discussion. I will now give time for our students to ask a question, and then maybe Jan, you can then answer if you want some time, but let's not forget about our interns. So please, if you have any question, please, now is the time. Luca, did you want to ask some question?
Okay, so I hope you can hear me. This discussion is particularly interesting for me because the research I'm conducting for this program is about the war in Ukraine and its geopolitical aspects. And I do have one question for Mr. Jan and one question for Mihajlo. So, Mr. Jan, I have a hypothetical situation, if you can perhaps consider it. What do you think would happen if perhaps Mexico or Cuba would sign some form of a military agreement or a treaty that would form a military alliance among them? And what do you think would happen perhaps if the Russian ballistic missiles would be allocated on the territory of these two countries? Would the US react in the same way, or they would respect perhaps the territorial integrity and right of the self-determination? And for Mr. Mihajlo, do you think that perhaps in the end of this conflict there would be a need or there would be some kind of a revision of the whole international law and international order to establish some kind of new rules and some kind of new form of international law that would shape the whole international order, some kind of new conference of Yalta or something like that? Okay, that's my two questions.
Thank you very much.
I hope you did understand it.
Okay, thank you very much, Luca, again. So first Jan and then Mihajlo.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Luca, for your question. I will first address that, then I will address a couple of points of Marina and Mihajlo. Well, the scenario which you describe is not the theoretical. Actually, it happened during the Cuban crisis in the 60s, and we know how it finished. So the US forced Cuba to oust the Russia's missiles from their territory, but on the other hand, they didn't change the regime. The regime is there still, even we have year 2022. So there was no regime change. Yes, there were attempts, but there was not a regime change at the end. Couple of points to what Marina raised about the Bucharest summit of NATO, and that is the root of all evils. Well, not exactly. Because up until the year 2014, Ukraine was militarily neutral. So, and it was not even pursuing membership to NATO. That was still just PFP, and they didn't pursue this, especially when there was a pro-Russian president, Yanukovych, and that is one part. But what is more important part, after the year 2008, there were, and also in the year 2008, there were plenty of NATO member states that would veto enlargement of NATO by Ukraine and by Georgia. And Russia knew this very well, because one of those countries was Germany. And it was Merkel who basically vetoed or changed the wording in Bucharest memorandum, that they are not getting even the membership action plan. So that's the big difference. So they didn't give them even the first step back in 2008 because of the veto by one of the member countries. Russia knew very well that something like this will not pass through NATO. So this argument is based on water. Color revolutions. Well, the concept of color revolutions, whether they are real or not, what we have seen at the beginning of this operation in Ukraine was something totally different than a colorful revolution. Russia invaded Ukraine with the aim to militarily change the regime through old tactics like tanks moving to the territory and circling the capital and ousting the regime. This is not comparable with the colorful revolutions. Colorful revolutions were at least initiated by the people, the very people who were from that very country where it took place, and that wanted a political change. That was the case of Georgia. That was case of Ukraine. That was a case of some other countries where they wanted to change their previous regime. Sometimes because they were just fed up with how corrupt the previous authorities were, like for example in Georgia. But there are also other regime changes which are not that mentioned that often. For example, in Armenia. In Armenia, there was also peaceful yet revolutionary change. There was a corrupt regime before. There were street protests that led to change of the government at the helm with the former journalist, who in his own mind, he is more pro-Western than pro-Russian. But since the reality is Armenia has to be a strong ally of Russia, so they align their foreign policy with Russia. So are we calling it a colorful revolution? Well, we don't, because Russia is not calling it that way, because they didn't divert it from the pro-Russian foreign policy. So that's why they are not calling it the colorful revolution. So these are those nuances. Nuclear deterrence. Yes, I stick to what I said. If Ukraine had the nuclear weapons, Russia would not be on its territory, that's for sure, or we would not exist anymore because of the nuclear holocaust. But unfortunately, that's the sad truth. The countries that have nuclear weapons, they are immune to sudden urge needs of their neighbors or other powers to change the regime or to change the territory or something. So so again, this is a discussion about the balance of power versus international law, what Mihajlo was then kind of referring to. So maybe after this war, there will be some kind of a new settlement or the need for a new settlement. But what it sounded to me like, it was more like a balance of power, which I think we are way past that point already. There was a Second World War, and the countries agreed that never again, and that's why they established international organizations, UN and the international law. In order there is not a force of stronger countries pushed on those weaker. So we should not think about the balance of power, but we should think about the rule of the international law. And that's what I'm getting back to my argument. Let's not use the precedences or mistakes of the past to dictate how the country should behave in the future, because that is the road to abyss, literally. NATO bases. Well, there were no NATO installations on the territory of new members after the enlargement of NATO. They were created only after year 2014 in the direct response to Russia's occupation of parts of Ukraine and seizure of Crimea. Before then, there was no NATO presence in new countries. So now we have basically presence in all frontline states. Up until the year 2022, Slovakia did not have NATO presence on its territory, because Slovakia has also some kind of a Stockholm syndrome towards Russia from time to time. So there was no political will to have NATO forces stationed on Slovak territory before the year 2022. But that changed with the Russia's aggression against Ukraine again. So even now, the political situation in Slovakia changed, and we accepted Americans, Slovenians, Dutch, German, Czechs, Poles, and their troops on our territory, because we were frankly afraid of what's going on our eastern border. So this is another kind of a strategic change in the perception, because Slovakia before was kind of a hesitant. Okay, we are a member of NATO, we fulfill all the criteria, we are in line with all those that is required from us, but at the same time we didn't want to kind of upset Russia because of the energy ties and business ties and cultural ties, all these things, but that changed. Okay, and then and then Mihajlo was mentioning the remedial secession, that Russia supported it in terms of Donbass, but did not support it in case of Kosovo because criteria were not fulfilled. Well, that's again based on interpretation. Of course, Russia is not interpreting Kosovo case the way as it would Luhansk and Donetsk, because they want to keep Serbia on its orbit, or at least a close ties of Serbia. So of course they would say that Kosovo did not fulfill the criteria, but in reality, both Donetsk and Luhansk republics, they were promised to have a constitutional framework, because it is written in the Minsk I and Minsk II agreements, but those unfortunately did not pass into the practice, because Russia did not agree with the other points of the Minsk I and Minsk II, and that was that Ukraine will control fully the border between Ukraine and Russia's, and that the Russia's troops will be moved, and Donetsk and Luhansk will be granted representations in the parliament, and also all other constitutional rights. So comparing these two, that is also very sensitive. Yes, and and the last point that I would like to make, that there might be a kind of a freeze of military gains just for the sake of negotiations, and that Russia can get away with it. Well, I frankly hope that Russia will not get away with this. Ukraine should not agree to the freeze of and to create another frozen conflict, because that gives Russia just another venue for salami tactics later, as they did in 2014. And now, first they cut it just Crimea, and they cut it just Donbass. Now they included also Kherson and parts of Zaporizhia. Then in 2 years, 3 years, they will again cut something else and else and else. That's a salami tactics. Ukraine should not fall for that, and neither West. So Russia should be held accountable. West should continue support for Ukraine as long as there is a last Russian soldier on the Ukrainian territory.
Thank you very much, Jan. Maybe Mihajlo cannot be that passionate about defending Russian position as Jan is in defending NATO position. But this is for thinking for me for some other event to call somebody from Russia. So the next time we will have discussion between one part of or member of NATO and one from the Russia. So this is my promise for the next time. But now, does anyone of students have any question now before I give the word to Mihajlo? Okay, Uroš, please.
No, my bad. I want to start some other reasons, justifications. So let Professor Mihajlo answer Luka's question.
Okay, anybody else? If not, I will give the floor to Mihajlo to conclude his remarks and to answer to the question and maybe to some of the points that Jan made. Mihajlo, please.
Yes, thank you. Regarding Luka's question, definitely, I mean, after every big conflict in the world, we had another settlement on the basis of international law. At the end, international law is what we have. I mean, we don't have any better kind of system for regulating the relations between states, even in times of conflict, and in times of peace, of course, it is the most suitable. So what I expect from this settlement is, of course, difficult to predict, but as I already mentioned, I think that definitely new rules on the use of force are needed to preserve the system in any degree of stability, because currently we don't know what is allowed and what is not, and to whom. It will be much, how to say, more better for good neighborly relations and good international relations in general to state clearly in that great powers have bigger rights than small states, right? There is a concept of sovereign equality, but obviously not all states are equal when it comes to the use of force, because no matter how times Jan repeats that precedents, we shouldn't repeat them, but they're being repeated. And as I said, what is the most important in this regard? These breaches of law are not being repaired. There is no enforcement of rules. The states are just getting away with it. It's not just Yugoslavia, it's Iraq, it's Afghanistan, it's you name it. I mean, there are so many instances, and Ukraine is just one of them. So in a way, there is a much bigger fuss going on about Ukraine than it should, in a way, deserve, because it's just one in the line of conflicts. One is the line of conflicts which this world has experienced, which are being waged illegally. And this is why I cannot defend Russia. I mean, nobody can defend Russia except maybe the legal advisor for the Russian Foreign Ministry. As Marina said, we should bring someone who's defending it. I cannot defend it. It is obviously in breach of current rules, but I'm just saying the rules are not functioning. And Russia obviously is giving a statement that they're not functioning with this war. They want to change the rules. And this is why they acted in Ukraine. So if I may answer to Luca, I don't know, I mean, what the settlement will look like, but I hope there will be a revision of international rules for the sake of stability of relations. To conclude, any other remarks? I mean, I think I've really discussed enough. We don't have enough time to touch all the points. Maybe it's better to give the floor to other students to ask some questions, to raise some other points.
Okay, so we have 5 minutes more. If anybody of you wants to have some question, do you have any question, students? Okay, Rush, please.
Yes, thank you, Marina. I will try to be as short as I can, but I can't promise. Okay. In my opinion, of course, when we talk about argumentative reasons for Russia to start this, look from international aspect of international law aggression on Ukraine, I would put in first place biological laboratories. Before I start to talk about present, I think it's very important to just in short lines tell something about history of them. In period of existing Soviet Union, there were a lot of laboratories which founder was Russia, and after 1991 year, Russia couldn't handle all those laboratories, so USA offered to take them and to simply, I could say, ruin them, but with respecting international law. It didn't happen like that. USA took samples of dangerous pathogens and biomaterials back to the USA, researched them, and get back them into those laboratories and even improve them. One interesting fact is that those doctors, scientists which are working in them, have immunity, which one is more, if I could say like that, powerful than diplomats. In one sentence, in that, in explaining their immunity, there is a sentence which is telling that if somebody die because of their work, those scientists cannot be in charge by the court, of course, which is interesting, if not more. So about today, in period from 5th to 9th September, of course, this year, in Geneva, there were conducted a conference about USA and Ukraine cooperation in breaking first and fourth article of Convention of forbidding biological and toxic weapons. due to what representative of Russian Federation said, Ukraine wasn't. I will read it. I don't want to make a mistake. Ukraine didn't manage to make point out the reasons for rushed ruining evidence about their military biological activities in cooperation with USA. Also, Ukraine Ukraine ignored incompletely question about their unfounded about her unfounded saving all those biological dangerous pathogens, and her roughly breaking out number 1 and number 4 article from convention. Also, Ukraine haven't managed.
Thank you. We could read that also. Maybe you could put some link. So do you have any concrete question now?
Yes, for Mr. Jan, just one question. Mr. Jan said that Russia could stop this war tomorrow if she wanted. If you consider claims that USA is more stronger than Russia, then why? I believe logical question is why then NATO is not taking some actions in objective to stop this war and of course save innocent Ukrainians. And please, Marina, if I can tell just one more sentence. Consultation actually. Mr. Jan, you mentioned that some against law activities which is military operators from Russia are doing against Ukrainian soldiers. I think
civilians, not soldiers, civilians.
Okay, civilians, but we have something in war which is calling cunning of war, in particular case of Yugoslavia, Serbia, back in 1999. Serbs were doing something like making fake airplanes, bridges, putting ground on their tanks so they be protected from infrared cameras. But some activities from Ukraine, which are being conducted by Ukrainian soldiers, like setting up artillery, simply saying military technology and weapons near hospitals and civilian buildings, especially maternity hospital, is activity which is crossing red line of cunning of war and getting into, I believe, something which we can call breaking international law, military and human, of course. All right.
Okay. Thank you very much, Uroš. Yes, I also wanted to add that, as Jan mentioned, that Russia can end the war. Also, Russian perspective is that NATO can end the war in any time if they stop train military and if they stop bring military equipment and weapons to Ukraine. So the Russian position is that NATO can stop the war at any time if they stop supporting Ukraine, and the NATO position is that Russia can stop war at any time if they withdraw soldiers. So yeah, we have a lot of things here to be settled between the sides. Jan, in 1 minute, please.
Okay, I will be quick. Thank you very much. I will start with your argument, Marina, that NATO could stop it with not sending soldiers and equipment to Ukraine. Okay, what would be the end state? The Ukraine would be defeated and Russia would be controlling the whole Ukraine. Ukraine has a right to self-protect based on all international laws that Mihajlo was quoting, and it is doing so. It requested the international community for assistance, and the international community is sending the assistance. So they are working within the framework of the international law. Uroš, yes, Russia could end this conflict not tomorrow, today, if they would withdraw from the Ukraine's territory. About the biolabs, I quickly Googled it. That is unfortunately disinformation and narratives, already fake narratives. Russians were using this already in Georgia in 2008. They were also mentioning in Georgia there were these biolabs, and there was a threat of spreading pathogens. Unfortunately, this is a disinformation and fake news. So I will not comment on that any further. And rules of war. Yes, what you mentioned that falls under the category of rules of law, how the warring parties are proceeding and how they are using the terrain, etc., etc. Well, what we can see is that Russia is basically shelling the cities, cutting the electricity from the cities, cutting heating. Now, when the winter is coming, that is also a breach of the rules of war. First and foremost, Russia's soldiers should not be on the territory of Ukraine. So if had Russian soldiers not been on the territory of Ukraine, Ukraine wouldn't have to post its artillery wherever it is needed in order to repel Russia's attacks. So that's the first argument. And the second argument, yes, I know this was in the Human Rights Watch report, not Human Rights Watch, yes, Human Rights Watch report, I think, that was heavily criticized. Amnesty International, yes, you're right. That was heavily criticized by the Ukrainian side and also by other institutions that were operating on the ground, and they said that the Amnesty International used wrong methodology. They used unreliable sources. Plus, Amnesty International had very problematic reports already 2 years ago when there was a war in Karabakh. They published also very problematic reports. So Amnesty International, unfortunately, is not unbiased in this regard.
Okay, thank you for your answer, Mr. Jan. Answers. I'm honestly hoping that we will have some more opportunities to talk about this subject.
Yes, well, I really think that this is very interesting topic that we could discuss for much longer. And I believe I will just finish this event in the spirit as I started, that the only actually reasonable solution of this situation can be diplomacy and peace. So we hope that all parties can be at the round table. Of course, the peace and the diplomacy is only possible when the parties see their positions as favorable to them. So I believe that the diplomacy will be possible only when NATO and Russia think that the diplomacy is the best way and the only possible way for them. Obviously, for now, both parties or all parties are still taking the positions from which they are going to negotiate new rules and new settlements and agreements. But as the greatest result of the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was the greatest crisis of the Cold War, was the arms control, great arms control settlement and strategic stability, I believe that this Ukrainian war, which is maybe the worst situation in the relationship between the great powers in the decades, will end with the new arms control deal, with the new agreements that are covering the use of force and all the other things that are problematic between the parties. But for now, we are in this time of changes, of taking better positions. But for a year, maybe, I hope that this will end. We cannot hope that some of the party, or we cannot think that some of the party will withdraw. That will be too naive for us to think. So the parties will not withdraw. I'm certain in that. The parties will only take best possible positions for them to negotiate. And when they do that, we can only hope for the best deal between the great powers. So with this, on this Armistice Day, which is a holiday in Serbia, I will end this session. I want to thanks very much to our guest speakers, to Mr. Jan Cingel from Strategic Analysis Think Tank, and to Dr. Mihajlo Vučić, my colleague from the Institute of International Politics and Economics. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope we will have a chance, maybe in person, again to discuss all of these topics. Thanks to all interns, and we will be, of course, in touch and connected through the whole internship program. So thank you again, and see you on the next occasion. Bye-bye.
Thank you. All the best.